Okay, it's 8 o'clock. I can see that we have a quorum, so I'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. I'll call to order the Audit Committee meeting for this morning, May 9th. Carla, do you want to go ahead and read the announcements?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Sanchez. This meeting is being conducted as a virtual meeting, so I will do a roll call of the trustees to confirm attendance. Mr. Bernstein?
I'm here.
Mr. Jones?
Present.
Mr. Kelly? Mr. Knox?
Good morning, I'm here.
Mr.
Kelly's
Moore.
here.
Mr. Kelly, good morning. Mr. Moore?
I'm here also.
Mr. Santos? Okay. And Chair Sanchez.
I am here.
Okay. From the Board of Retirement, Mr. Pryor? Mr. Kehoe? Ms. Gray? Mr. Harris? Mr. Robbins? Mr. Sanchez?
Present. Good morning.
Good morning. Ms. Apanta? From the Board of Investments, Mr. Green? Mr. Kehoe? Mr. Greenwood? Ms. Greenwood, excuse me. Ms. Jones? Okay. Staff participating in the meeting include CEO Santos Bryman, Deputy CEO Luis Lugo, AEOs Laura Guglielmo and JJ Popovich, Chief Legal Counsel Steve Rice. Internal audit staff include Richard Bendel, Alicia Collins, Christina Logan, Catherine Tun, Christina Sun, Nathan Namek, George Lundy, and Gabriel Tafoya. Interim System Division Manager Casey Delino. Interim Assistant System Division Manager Sami Bong. Interim Chief Information Security Officer Robert Schultfeld. Director of Human Resources Carly Natoya. Assistant Chief Financial Officer Ted Granger. Consultants include Doug Slyke, Audrey Donovan, Roger Alfaro, Fermide Bailey, Jean Young, Amanda Kronk from Plant Moran, and Kevin Villanueva from Moss Adams. Audit Committee consultants include Robert Griffin. Trustees, if you would like to be placed in the queue, please use the Zoom chat option. At this time, we ask all meeting participants to mute their mics until you are ready to speak, and now we may begin to proceed with the agenda. Ms. Sanchez?
Okay, thank you. And we shall proceed. Let's go ahead and go to the approval of the minutes. Do I have any comments, questions, or a motion?
I have a question.
Yes, Joe?
On page 5 of the minutes, under good of the order, it states Mr. Griffin and Mr. Bendel provided brief comments to the committee on the EQA report. EQA, I think, might be an acronym, but it's not defined. And nowhere earlier in the minutes is there a reference to EQA report. So I think it might be informative to clarify what the EQA report is or was.
Okay, is that the only comment, or are there others?
The only comment.
Okay, so if
I'd like
we
to move
could,
the minutes as amended.
With that,
okay,
with
Thank you.
clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Bernstein. So we have one motion for the minutes with Mr. Kelly's amendment. Do I have a second?
Keith, I'll second.
Thank you. Go ahead and take the the roll, please.
Mr. Bernstein?
Aye.
Mr. Jones?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Mr. Knox?
Aye.
Mr. Moore?
Aye.
Mr. Santos?
Aye.
Chair Sanchez?
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, do we have any requests for public comment?
And none at this time.
All right, moving on to the consent item. Do we have a motion?
I'll move it.
Thank you. Second.
Keith, I'll second.
Okay. We'll be turning into the dynamic duo this morning. So we'll go ahead and take the roll, please.
Mr. Bernstein,
Aye.
Mr. Jones,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly,
I'm going to abstain.
Mr. Knox,
Aye.
Mr. Moore,
Aye.
Mr. Santos,
Yes.
Chair Sanchez,
Yes.
6 yeses and 1 abstain. The motion passes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so moving on to the non-consent item. Item A, we have a recommendation is submitted by Richard Bendel, Chief Audit Executive, and Catherine Tunn, Senior Internal Auditor, that the Audit Committee authorize staff to issue a request for proposal to select a qualified investment consulting firm to perform a consulting review of LACERA's investment office operational due diligence program and process. And there is a memo. I don't know if you want to make any comments, Mr. Bendel or Ms. Tunn?
Good morning, Madam Chair and trustees. Yeah, just that along with the investment due diligence, ODD is an important component of risk management in the investment office and is performed both pre-investment and post-investment. To obtain a meaningful assessment of LACERA's program, we're seeking this experienced outside consultants that have experience evaluating ODD on behalf of institutional clients. And just further, the timeline that is included on page 2 indicates that we'll be issuing the RFP if approved by the committee next week, and we'll be bringing it back to the committee for selection of the finalist in August.
Okay, we have one question, Mr. Santos.
Yes, good morning.
Oh, wait, Mr. Kelly, were you first? I couldn't catch the. Okay, we'll go with Mr. Santos, then Mr. Kelly. Thank you.
That's fine.
I'm in support of your recommendation. And I know I asked you this before, but I'm going to ask you again. I just want to make sure that this audit includes consultants, in a particular, well, other consultants, but in particular private equity, as well as hedge funds. The consultants do their own independent due diligence, and I want to make sure that this audit will include them.
They are within the scope of the audit, absolutely. The entire ODD program, and where we partner with the consultants, whether it's the overall consultant or as you mentioned, the private equity consultant, that will be within the scope of the audit, absolutely.
Thank you for that, and I appreciate the fact that the investment office, that your team worked with the investment office in creating this RFP. And with that, I move approval.
Okay, great. We have a couple more questions. Do we have a second, or should we move to the question?
I'll second. This is Keith, just to move it along.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Knox. Okay, so Mr. Kelly, you have a question?
I have several questions. Good morning. On page 3, the first paragraph, background information. The last sentence, LACERA administers a pension fund of approximately $2.3 billion in assets. That's not a correct statement. I think you might be referring to the non-pension trusts, which would be OPEB and primarily OPEB. So that has to be clarified. The first sentence in the following paragraph, LACERA is governed by 2 9-member boards, the Board of Retirement and the Board of Investment. That's not a true statement. The Board of Retirement has 9 trustees and 2 alternates, and you have to disclose that. On page 5, you write with the very first paragraph, you write within the investment policy statement, page 16 provides additional background regarding the asset allocation. I did not understand why you didn't provide information in this RFP to potential proposals regarding the number of asset managers by asset class. In other words, you want them to go out and investigate these operational processes. between the investment office and custodian and them, but there's no information about them. And you could conceivably refer to like the quarterly investment report, I think is a document that has all that information. But the volume of those relationships will drive the work to be done and the related bids. And I think it would be important that everyone have the same information, or at least be referred to the same document. So I do think it's important to provide some information regarding the number of relationships that we have. Under minimum qualifications, the next section 3, I don't know why you didn't reference the standards related to consulting. In other words, this is not an audit, which you do appropriately identify, although later on it is called an audit in the document. I'll get to that. But the standards are specific to consulting services, and I don't know why you didn't reference that this audit or this assignment should be conducted in accordance with these standards for consulting services. I think that's important to do. You also don't say that any firm who already has a relationship with LACERA for other business, or a firm that has submitted a response to an RFP for other business is precluded from bidding on this. And I assume that's the case. I mean, we don't want Goldman Sachs ODD unit to come in and audit this area. If consult in this area, if Goldman Sachs has an investment management relationship with the investment office, correct?
Correct.
Is that correct, Richard?
That is correct.
Okay.
And
Okay.
we should,
Okay. So I think that needs to be said somewhere. On 3A, you write the proposing firm must provide investment-related consulting services or auditing services for a minimum of 10 years. And my comment there is, this doesn't say related to institutional clients. And sometimes you mention institutional clients and sometimes you don't. But I do think that you should reference institutional clients in terms of certainly this section and anywhere else where you talk about client base. And then on B, the proposed team should have extensive experience performing ODD on behalf of institutional clients. The team leader must have performed ODD related work within the past 10 years. So the team leader working on a single ODD assignment in 10 years qualifies him or her to be the team leader. If it was 9 years ago, we're okay with that. This space hasn't evolved in 9 years, but we want that experience to be more current and more than one. I'm just throwing it out there. I don't know. I don't really have an opinion one way or the other, but that B seemed a little light to me. I just throw that out there for you to consider. Okay, on page 8. I wanted to make sure I understood this. On page 8, we say selected respondents may be invited to an interview by LACERA boards. So we're approving this RFP, not the boards. And then respondents, if they have questions, they go directly to the boards. They don't go through the committee, the audit committee at all. The role of the audit committee here was a little odd to me because it read as if the audit committee is approving the RFP, and then any issue after this that would involve an entity is the board. And that struck me as odd because I think this may then be the first procurement where the boards are delegating the review of the RFP to a committee. That's just, I wasn't clear about the role of the committee after today because you refer only exclusively to boards. Does this committee have delegated authority to manage this RFP and process?
yeah, absolutely. It is the audit committee's responsibility. I think this is general language.
Yeah, but I think it needs to be tailored.
Well, I think that it's the contract language that we wouldn't, during the quiet period for the RFP, we wouldn't want people, prospective proposers to not only not talk to the audit committee, it would be all trustees. So
That's
I think
fine.
some of it I think is fine. We need to look at it and make sure that anything that relates to the business of the is related to the audit committee. So we'll take a look at that.
Okay, that's good. That's a good thing to do. On page 10, the same comment, under 7, contract negotiations, the first sentence, Upon board approval, staff will enter into contract negotiations. Again, is it audit committee, is it board, is it both? I don't know. The third paragraph, the fourth paragraph under the same section. Respondents, respondents are required in their response to identify and explain any exception that it desires to take of any of the terms and conditions of this RFP. And I don't think that's correct. I think you mean of the general form of the contract, not of this RFP. It's of the general form. Of the
Where
contract.
were you right now? I
I'm on
apologize.
page 10,
Uh-huh.
section 7, fourth paragraph down, first sentence. Respondents are required in their response to identify and explain any exception that it desires to take to any of the terms and conditions of this RFP. This RFP is incorrect. I think you mean to refer to the general form of the contract discussed in the previous paragraph. Because that's what they're taking exception to, not the RFP. And on page 14, under 5, assigned professionals. It's a long sentence, but it's the first sentence. And it says that the group must work together as a team and also to work effectively with LACERA's boards and staff in performing the audit. Again, I think that's, if you do a search for LACERA board for the issue we just discussed in terms of authority, I think you'll get it. On page, this is a busy one, but it's my last page. Okay, page 15. On the very first end of the first paragraph, up on top, it said the second sentence says, LACERA expects that this section of the response will only include those persons committed to supporting LACERA and investing in a relationship with LACERA on a regular and long-term basis. I wonder if I've read this, I thought LACERA might be dating, might be trying to find a partner or something. They have no desire to have a long-term relationship with us. They're in for this one job, so that's just want to be. And then the following paragraph, with respect to diversity, the response must include, and we list a number of characteristics under the diversity umbrella. And this list excludes disability. And I thought when we took an action this past year, we added disabilities to the list. So if you can check that. In the next bullet, there's something missing in that sentence. The oversight of this person who is responsible for oversight. I think it should be of the firm's method to measure the effectiveness. So you're missing of. Under client references number 6, the proposer shall provide 3 clients for whom, what are my issues there? Oh yeah, okay, so this is not cool. For whom it has provided investments related audit / consulting services related ODD. This is not an audit, it's a consulting and engagement. So scratch the word audit there. And
I think in that case, we're just asking for references, whether they performed audit for other clients or consulting. We'd want to know about those as references. So that's not specific to this assignment, but what have they done for other clients?
but if they give us all audit references, does that really matter? I mean, they're references.
Would be
but
fine.
It's not references for consulting, for ODD.
If it was done on an agreed upon procedures basis, I mean, it could be considered an audit, and yet it still would be a review of an ODD program at an institutional client. I think it would meet the requirements for our purposes as a reference.
Okay, those are my comments.
No, thank you. A couple of them we did catch, and that was in the green folder item. I think at the beginning of the first page, we actually said it was a $74 pension fund. We added the billion, and the 2.3 billion, which had come from the benefits, the healthcare benefits fund. We corrected that one as well.
I didn't get any information on the green folder.
The green folder
It
should have
is-
been was sent
It
out
is
on
in the
Wednesday.
supplemented, yeah, it was in the supplemental information.
And how
But
would
we
I,
certainly didn't catch all of your comments, and
How would I
thank
know
you, Mr. Kelly.
you're welcome. How would I know the supplemental information was distributed? Did anyone tell us? Perla, Richard, did anyone tell us the supplemental information had been released?
We get an email that shows that supplemental
Yeah.
information was released.
Oh,
I
we
believe it
did?
came from
Yeah.
Bonnie.
Okay, I didn't see that email. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I could just step in, I know we have two sets of questions, two more questions here in the queue, I believe. Some of these questions are simply typos or suggestions that don't change the character of the sentence, but clarify. There are others that kind of question this relationship between the committee and the board, and I'm not sure to what degree every single one of those is necessary. Mr. Bendel, I would like to hear what you have to say. And then, well, actually, there's two groups. I mean, that I heard of that laundry list. So in order to facilitate this process, because what I would like to do is take a motion with amendments, but I think we need a clarification on what the amendments are going to be so that we can make the motion move smoothly.
I would move the item to, with the caveat that Mr. Bendel consider all comments provided to him. And then he can report back to the committee on the issue of the board and the committee. I don't think we have to hold it for his disposition of that. I mean, I trust him that he's going to align the process with how things work in other with other committee board relationships. I mean, committees review RFPs on the BOI all the time.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Herman.
We already have a motion on the
That's
floor
correct.
that we have to deal with that. If
That's
there
correct.
is a substitute motion being made, that's a different thing. Personally, I made the motion. I think all these recommendations are petty and we need to just move on. So that's my position. All those amendments, except for the amendments that Mr. Bendel already agreed that are already in the supplemental report. Other than that, I will reject all of them. It's petty.
Okay, respectfully, I would recommend the one recommendation that was made was the number of relations. I do think that is material to the process of building the bid. And so I wonder, Mr. Bendel, if you could include a sentence, if you could include a sentence at the end of page 5, the second paragraph within the investment policy statement, page 16 of the IPS, At the end of that, just clarify the total number of relationships along with the changes you have already made. I think that would be helpful. Mr. Santos, would you accept that in your motion?
Yes, that will be limited to that only.
Oh, okay, Mr. Knox.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, Mr. Moore, you have a question?
Yeah, I had a couple of things that I wanted to get clarified. And one of them was the issue of minimum qualifications that Mr. Kelly Rose brought up, and that was about the number of years of experience that the team leader has to have versus the team members for this engagement. And it just didn't read like the team leader had to have any real experience other than 10 years in the business. So I wanted to get Mr. Bendel to kind of explain that to me and why that would be permissible. And I also had a general question about when you advertise this, what is the outreach or distribution mechanism? How does it go out to the industry? And
Is
how do we
that my
make
computer or
certain?
is he logged up?
Oops, Mr.
Okay, and
Mr. Jones.
how, let me just finish then. Can everybody hear me? I'm assuming you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, so also wanted to know, how do we make sure in doing our due diligence when we get responses back that we may not be hiring someone who has relationships with some of the companies they're going to be reviewing for us? Yeah, you get what I meant
Always
by that?
impressed by, sorry,
Yeah, you get what I mean by that?
I'm
You said,
impressed by people that can answer multi questions and get it all straight, but let me give it a shot. The first question on the experience of the lead, it talks about the firm in A having 10 years of experience. It talks about the lead having performed ODD work. The team leader must have performed that ODD work within the past 10 years. So it does talk about that, as well as the firm, each member on the team having at least 5 years of experience. So could you further?
does that mean that the lead person also has to have 5 years of experience?
Yes, at a minimum,
That's what
everybody
I
on the
was,
team would have to have at least 5 years of experience.
well,
So,
that's what I was uncertain of. And that's
well,
what,
each team member has to have 5 years of experience. So I guess what it's saying there is the lead has to have worked in this business. The partner themselves, if it's the partner or principal of a firm, they may not have to have necessarily. It's up for interpretation. I think it could be interpreted either way. If we consider is Catherine on the line? Maybe she could clarify
yeah,
this for me.
I just wanted that to be clear because it just wasn't clear to me. It seemed like the example that Mr. Kelly gave, where the person who was leading our engagement really didn't have to have any experience leading this type of work, but the actual team members who were going to be engaged in the consulting services had to have that experience. So why can't the lead be required to meet the same minimum qualifications as his team members or her team members?
Mr. Moore, they should, and we'll clarify that in the RFP before we post it on the LACERA website.
Okay, and then I had that other question about making sure that you could identify any potential conflicts. And I did have one last question, so I want to get that out of the way so we can move on to someone else. And that was, had this proposal, it says draft on it, had this been submitted to the committee before?
No, this is the way we bring RFPs. This is standard within LACERA to bring the RFP for approval prior to issuing it out, to solicit firms.
Well,
So
it just seems like we get this draft for review and approval on the 9th, and it's already scheduled to be released 2 days after we get it. So,
Mr. Moore, every RFP that goes in front of a board or a committee is marked draft in order to avoid confusion.
yeah, that's okay. But is it a draft or is it just something we're supposed to approve because it's already scheduled to go out the day after tomorrow? That just seemed a little incongruent to me.
And the answer is every RFP that comes before either this committee, the investment committee, any of the BOI subcommittees are all marked draft in order to avoid them being construed as an approved RFP. So this is brought to us for our approval, in which case it will be changed from draft to the RFP.
And I believe that we as staff, prior to issuing the RFP, are going to go through it and make sure that we're consistent and, do a once over on the RFP before we issue it. And that's standard practice in the organization. So notwithstanding, all of the comments, we do want it to go out correctly, because that's just going to avert having unnecessary questions come in from the bidders. And so to the point of approving specifically which changes are going to be made or not, I think it's typical at LACERA when RFPs are approved, that staff then, they're approved, I guess, in form, but prior to issuance, I think checking it over to make sure it's right, I think is appropriate and prudent.
I can just add that it is standard practice at LACERA to do it this way. And nothing is final until the board and the committee members say it's final.
Okay. I believe then, Ms. Tan, as it reads right now, granted it is open for interpretation, but as it reads right now, each member would be assumed to include the team leader, which means that every member of our team will have at least 5 years of experience, and that the team leader will have performed that experience within the last 10 years and not 25 years ago. I believe that's how I read it, but you will add whatever clarifying comment in there in order to ensure that everybody is experienced and recently experienced. So we have a motion. We have a second. Are there any further questions?
I had a comment.
Yeah.
So in response to Mr. Moore's comments, which are excellent, Ms. Tan says, "Oh, we'll look into that and we'll make sure we revise it." So I went through this morning, last night, spent 90 minutes reviewing it, and my comments are material. And yes, some of them are formatting, and I resent the characterization of them as petty. So and Mr. Moore's comments are reasonable as well. So I'm going to introduce a substitute motion that we accept this document from staff, and we ask the Chief Audit Executive to consider the committee's comments in terms of revisions, and we go from there. That's my motion. Substitute motion.
We would need a second for the substitute motion.
Second.
Yeah, I'll second it.
Okay, so we have a substitute motion on the table, which I believe we vote first. And then if that does not pass, we will go to the motion. So we can begin with substitute motion. Perla?
Mr. Bernstein? Mr. Bernstein? I'll come back. Mr. Jones?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Mr. Knox?
And just to be clear, this is to refer all the comments back just for consideration. This is not specifying which should be incorporated or should not.
The former. All comments are considered by Mr. Mendel.
I'd rather be clear on what we were referring back, so I'll vote no.
Mr. Moore?
Aye.
Mr. Santos?
No.
Chair Sanchez?
No.
Mr. Bernstein?
I believe Mr. Bernstein had to leave early.
Okay. We have 3 yeses and 3 nos.
So that fails.
Yes.
So we move to the original motion with the amendments as accepted,
Which are what?
which are the one amendment was adding the number of relationships to the sorry, I've lost my page here. Here we go. Adding the number of relationships on page 5 at the end of the paragraph within the investment policy statement, page 16, etc.
So statements that are currently in the draft that are inaccurate do not get fixed.
There are certain statements that were already fixed.
Right,
Most of it.
I just want to be clear about what the motion is. Thank you.
Yeah, that is the motion.
Understood.
Okay. Parallel.
Okay. Mr. Jones?
I think I understand what's at stake, so I'll go ahead and say aye.
Mr. Kelly?
No.
Okay. Mr. Knox?
Aye.
Mr. Moore?
No.
Mr. Santos?
Yes.
Chair Sanchez?
Aye.
We have 4 yeses and 2 nos. The motion passes.
Okay, I think I'll take a moment at the end of this. I understand how much time it takes to go through these, to go through these, and do appreciate the comments that are made. I do think that there is something to be said for clarity about what we are voting, and I think that was probably the crux of where the conversation was, which was that you know, it is one thing to say, use your judgment and issue this in 2 days. And I think that, you know, is one way to approach it. But where we landed was to have enumerated things that we were agreeing that we wanted changed. And I think in order to be productive going forward, we should try to, when we make our recommendations and amendments, recommendations for amendments, that we be very clear about which amendments we are a requirement and what are questions for clarifications. And I think that the materiality issue, you know, is a question that, you know, comes sometimes from perspective. And so I want to make sure that we kind of all can agree on what our perspective is. And I think we're doing some, because we're changing our processes slightly, you know, to be more consistent with other committees, that, you know, that may cause us some consternation. It's a growing pain, but I think we can get there. And so I don't want anybody to walk away from this process feeling like they weren't heard or that their efforts are not appreciated. And so I just want to make that comment. We'll move on to item B, the recommendation as submitted by George Lund, Senior Internal Auditor, that the audit review and discuss the LACERA staff bonus program. So I'll go ahead and hand it to Mr. Lund.
Good morning, Chair Sanchez, trustees of the audit committee. I'd like to present to you the LACERA staff bonus program audit. Bit of background, in November 2019, the Los Angeles County Auditor Controller made recommendations related to LACERA's monitoring and oversight of the LACERA bonus program. LACERA staff bonus program is managed by the Human Resources Division, which is responsible for awarding and monitoring of the bonuses and policies. During our audit, we found that HR had developed some policies and procedures. However, they were never formalized and they were never adopted. This resulted in bonuses that are generally compliant with Los Angeles County Code, but since there is not a LACERA bonus policy or procedure, bonuses are not administered consistently. We also noted during the audit that the reports provided to executive officers and division managers weren't sufficient to support management's decisions on monitoring bonuses. That's the extent of my comments at the moment. I'll be happy to address any questions.
Great, thank you. Do we have any questions on this?
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Moore?
Yeah. What seemed a little bit troubling to me on this audit and the responses is that I don't see how we could have a practice of having unlimited reclassifications and, you know, salary bonuses with no end date at all. It seems to me that the default condition for all of these should always be it's a specific term for all of these actions and that they have to be re-engaged or reapproved or something going forward. And so I don't know what the outcome of the management action plan is going to be at the end of the month of May. But I certainly hope that that is in any future plans that we have on administering these type of bonus programs, is that they all must end at some point unless they're reauthorized.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. That is a great question. And I guess that would be, Mr. Lund, is that included in the policy that was never formalized, or will there be a new formal policy created as a result of this audit?
It's our information that that the policy has been enhanced to include all bonuses. In the draft policy, there was a review period of 1 year, but it didn't include all bonus awards. So we're looking forward to the results of the draft policy and its status at the end of the month also, Mr. Moore.
And for clarification, I just want to push it just a little further because I don't think that was clear. Will the default of a bonus be that it has an end date? Because Mr. Moore is right, the default right now seems to be in perpetuity, which I don't think is appropriate. And I think at one point we were concerned that these were ways of getting around county stipulations for salary. So is the default in the new policy going to stipulate that every bonus should have an end date? I think I see Ms. Guglielmo's hand up.
Thank you.
Morning, Chair Sanchez. Yes, the draft policy has been drafted by HR. It's with the executive office for review. We're on schedule to meet our May 31st deadline. And while I believe that is, we haven't completed our review, I believe that is our intent as well. So we take this feedback from you today, that direction. We'll make sure that happens.
Great. And do you know what the end date standard will become, or what the end date standard should be?
I have not had I have not reviewed the policy yet. So I don't have an answer for that at this point, and it hasn't been determined yet because we haven't as the executive team haven't considered that yet.
Okay, well, I think Mr. Moore's comment is really this notion that it looks like they are granted in perpetuity, and I think that is not the right standard. So Mr. Knox had a question?
And we agree with that.
Yes, thank you. And I had the same comment, especially when it comes to the additional responsibilities bonuses I had provided in my feedback, that on the county side, these expire at the end of every fiscal year unless they're renewed and approved. And the comment that I received back was, we will pass this approach on to HR for their consideration. So I guess to Ms. Guglielmo, so when will that decision be made and how is that loop closed with us? Because I would understand these to be more of, we're not setting policy, but we're expecting to see this, this loop closed, not considered, and we'll find out next time we audit this in 5 or 6 years. Because to me, just untidiness in operations in HR speaks to untidiness in all kinds of other areas.
Yes, Trustee Knox, I understand your point of view. The challenge that I have is that the executive team hasn't had a chance to review and discuss the policy yet. We plan to be doing that in the next couple of weeks. But we understand your perspective. We agree that there should be an end date. I think we need to kind of debate whether that should be at the end of the fiscal year, because these kinds of decisions come in periodically. And if something is approved in May, do you really want it to end in June, or do you want to have, a 6-month period or some other period? But we do want to make sure that we have a process for the review that is consistent, and that we have a process in place so that we can make sure that we're complying with that. And then to the second part of your question, how will we respond? I'm not quite sure, and I'm happy to take direction. This is a policy that is, I believe, within the CEO's purview, but I don't know if there's any issue with providing a a follow-up or providing it as information material to the committee.
So let me jump in here. So added class bonuses and additional responsibilities bonuses will have a fiscal year or 1 year review. There are some certifications I understand that are multiple years, so we just need to kind of refine that and make sure that we're coordinating whether it should be a 1 year review, a 2 year review, or a 3 year review. We are more than happy once we provide we approve the policy, the operational policy. More than happy to report that out to Richard Bendel, and then he can go ahead and report it to the committee members. We can certainly schedule it for a follow-up meeting, the next meeting, just to brief you as a report. Be more than happy to do that. But I read the first one, the first policy, I think when I first got here. I think it was in 2020, mid 2020, and so we'll make the adjustments that are being requested by the board. It just makes good sound fiscal practices and policy practices.
Thank you, Mr. Kryman. You actually read my mind. I was going to actually move to accept and file, but provide further instruction to report back when the policy was finalized for reporting. So we have another question, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. So I'm not going to support this because I submitted questions and I did not receive answers by this morning. I do in general think the report gave the kind of feeling that LACERA has much more discretion in developing these policies and procedures than it really does. These programs are codified in the county code, and in order to avail yourself of them, you have to meet the criteria in the county code. One of the reasons I was disappointed in the report is it wasn't clear that staff's actual audit program audited each employee's bonus in accordance with applicable sections of the county code. So in my mind, LACERA can take the county's procedures and policies in this area and put a cover memo on top saying we adopt these. So there's no need for, or very little need for LACERA to do much more than that. But I just wanted to clarify why I'm not going to support this motion.
Mr. Bendel, do you have a comment regarding that?
I would only say that generally, while we follow the county code when it comes to human resources practices, and this is my understanding, we at LACERA generally develop our own policies and procedures, and I believe that's in all respects of where we follow the county code. We do develop our own processes and procedures distinct from the county. I think we can certainly look to those to adopt some of the practices and some of the comments that have been made today. Again, this is not my call. Where the audit is, it is a management call, but that's my understanding.
Right, which would be consistent with our independence. So I understand what you just said. Mr. Moore?
Yeah, I don't have a preference whether we adopted the county, the Los Angeles County codes, or whether we created something ourselves. Whatever we come back, there should be termination dates for all of the bonuses, period. However you implement them, they should end at some point. So if I get a certification from some outside organization that authorizes me to get an increase in my salary, and I get that certification every 3 years, and I'm authorized this bonus, it ends in 3 years, unless you provide all the information and it's reapproved. If you're in a temporary position, you're in a temporary position for 6 months. It doesn't matter whether it crosses fiscal years or not. It's 6 months. At the end of 6 months, it's over. And that will take care of a lot of the issues that you see across all the different positions and situations and time periods and prospective policies and deferred policies and interpretations of policies. All of that stuff goes away because it starts and it ends.
Okay.
All
I
right.
think we Okay, we
You got
have got that one. Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Okay.
That I think Ms. Guglielmo has heard that one loud and clear now from 3 of us. So but I would like, as part of accepting and filing this report, a request that the final policy be reported back to the committee once it is finalized. I would like to go ahead and make that motion if there is a second for it.
I will second.
Thank you, Mr. Knox. Go ahead and take the roll.
Mr. Jones,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly,
No.
Mr. Knox,
Aye.
Mr. Moore,
Aye.
Mr. Santos,
Yes.
Chair Sanchez.
Yes. Okay, moving on. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, we have 5 yeses and 1 no. The motion
Thank you,
passes.
Carla. Okay, moving on to item C. The recommendation is submitted by Catherine Tunn, Senior Internal Auditor, that the Audit Committee review and discuss the comprehensive review of Human Resources Recruiting Process Report and take the following actions. So, Ms. Tunn?
Hello, Catherine's displaying it for me.
Sorry? Okay.
I am Doug Schleich with Bailey. I'm joined by Audrey Donovan and Roger Alfaro. We're the team that performed this project. Thank you, Madam Chair Sanchez and Audit Committee members. Additionally, we'd like to thank the organization's staff and internal audit department for their professionalism and responsiveness, which allowed us to complete our review. I will now proceed with my briefing. Advance to the next slide, please. Our firm was engaged to perform this review as LACERA's HR recruiting function has been a high-risk area identified within the internal audit plan. The objectives of the review included evaluating the organization's policies and procedures related to recruitment, consistency of recruiting procedures, and efficiency and effectiveness of the recruiting function. Our engagement included reviewing existing policies and procedures and performing interviews with members of the organization, including executives, division and HR management, and HR personnel. These interviews were designed to assess the HR department's interactions and communications with each of these divisions specific to recruitment. In these interviews, we discussed the division's recruiting needs, vacancies, and the underlying policies and procedures, in addition to additional information to gain an understanding of the recruiting process. Advance to the next slide, please.
Could we, Madam Chair, could we get the presentation back on the screen?
Yeah, we're not seeing the slides. I just.
Ms. Tunn, I think has had some issues with her computer froze, and I think she's logging back in right now to share the slides.
Thank you. Okay. Apologies.
Go ahead, Doug.
So the results of our review identified 3 opportunities for improvement to enhance the existing recruiting processes and achieve efficiency and effectiveness of recruiting. These are: establish a planned, measured, and optimized recruiting approach, develop and enhance existing policies and procedures and expand the use of automation, and enhance the structure and culture of the HR department and establish service level agreements with the divisions. We met with management to provide our recommendations, and management provided responses which addressed the opportunities which are included in our report. Advance to the next slide, please. We provided recommendations to enhance, I think you're 1 slide forward, thank you. We provided recommendations to enhance internal controls, which are included in our report. These fall under the following areas: strategy, through formalizing a workplace plan and succession plan; documentation, prepare an HR recruiting manual, including outlining the roles and responsibilities to perform the recruiting processes, align the HR department with the organization's recruiting strategy, and evaluate the department's capabilities and resources to serve the divisions, establish service level agreements which define the points of interactions with the divisions related to the recruiting, and finally, enhance reporting and measurement of recruiting outcomes. This concludes our presentation. Advance to the next slide, please. Questions?
Okay, I see one question from Mr. Moore.
Did I raise
Oh,
my hand?
is your hand just left raised? Okay,
Probably,
now-
but I
Sorry.
do have a question when we get to the end.
I believe we're at the end.
Oh, okay. Well, my it's an issue and a question. One of the questions was, well, why is the diversity and equity inclusion program timeline June 30th, 2024? It would seem like that would be something that would be more current and have a higher priority, since we do want to be a high-performing organization that reflects our constituency. And, you know, this is a very topical issue, diversity and inclusion, but it does not seem to be prioritized unless there's something going on that's not referenced here. And then generally, I have this issue with recruiting in that we have the significant number of vacancies, and in some of the departments, I can't take a paintbrush and paint everything the same color, but kind of generally speaking, when you have internal promotional opportunities, then to make those internal promotional opportunities available, we go through this long drawn out process to fill promotable vacancies. In the interim, while we're going through that process, there are vacancies in the division. And so you might spend a year and a half, 2 years trying to get internal people moved up so that you can open up positions that are in the lower level. So then you can go consult with another list to bring people in. And I think that there has to be some way that you can open that process up and make those decisions much sooner. And one way to do that might be to open up positions for external recruitment so you can move things along faster and occasionally bring in some new blood into the organization to keep the organization current, and just improve the dispatch with which you can fill positions. So I would like to see those things considered instead of us just keep doing things the same way that we've always done them for the last 25 years. And we'll never be able to get 85 to 100% of our positions filled because we have built a process and put it in place that prevents you from doing that.
Okay, so I heard two questions in there. The first is the priority and urgency for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the second is a question of efficiency with regard to promotions relative to recruitment. I see two hands raised that look like they want to answer those questions, Mr. Lugo and Mr. Kryman. Which of you wants to go first?
Let's go first.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair Sanchez, committee members. Trustee Moore, certainly your comments speak to our focus over the last several months. So in terms of DEI, that's our focus for every single recruitment that we have. As it relates to the timeline that you see highlighted, that's more so ensuring that we have an actual robust DEI program, not only within our recruitments, but also throughout the organization at LACERA, and making sure that we have the talent internally to be able to develop and deploy some of the DEI efforts that we're looking at deploying. As it relates to recruitment, that is one of the areas that we've spent quite a significant amount of time, the executive team, ensuring that we are looking for efficiencies while also being compliant to some of the county requirements we have as it relates to the recruitment activity. So there are some things that we have reviewed. We've had actually our council and also a third-party council review our mandates as it relates to the county and what flexibility we have with each of our recruitments, both internally and externally. So those are some of the things that we're going to be looking at as we produce a recruitment manual, a playbook for our staff. So certainly the comments that you've made are things that we're looking at prioritizing as it relates to being a lot more efficient in our recruitment practices. Because I agree, it's very extensive, and it's the turnaround time to get our recruitment posted and particular talent onboarded is we want to shrink that time frame with some efficiencies.
So, Mr. Lugo, can I just repeat the key components I took away from what you just said? The first was that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a standard part of every recruitment. This timeline is referring to a formalized policy and manual. Is that what I hear?
Yep, the timeline refers to actual programs embedded at LACERA and also assessing talent, whether or not there's a specified talent to internally to ensure that we have those programs active and running throughout the organization.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Criven, you wanted to chime in?
Yeah, in terms of the not doing things the way we've been doing for the last 25 years, one of the areas that we're exploring in trying to get more people into the system at the lower levels, we are looking at the potential of overhiring individuals at the lower levels so that we have, individuals that can come into LACERA and provide, good service to our members while promoting at the same time. And so it's a delicate balance, but we are looking at different ways of trying to get people on board faster and then promoted through the system as well. So there is a plan that we're looking at. I know that Carly and Laura, JJ, Lewis and I, we had a conversation, I think a couple of weeks ago about that, and how do we include it in our budget process, and how do we use and leverage some of the salary savings that we have embedded into the budget, for example. And so we are looking at different opportunities to try to bring people on board sooner rather than later. And so we also want to have a regular class coming in, either 1 or 2 classes a year, so that we can start filling these vacancies sooner rather than later.
Thank you. Mr. Criven, how much of this is coming from just catch up versus once we get once we sort of get caught up, will some of these strains alleviate themselves with regard to the way you're describing classes, bringing in classes?
Yeah, right now it's all catch up as far as we're concerned, but it will relieve the strain. I know that Carly, quite frankly, is stretched pretty thin and is strained often. Yes, we're trying to catch up right now. We're doing a good job. I think that the priority right now was the investment staff hires. We got the exams out that we promised Mr. Grable. We're working with him on some additional items. We were able to hire a couple of attorneys for Mr. Rice's shop, looking at adding a new class. I just met with the brand new retirement benefit specialist class last week. And so we're in the process of trying to get all those people hired and trained.
Okay. All right, Mr. Kelly.
I had a question on management response to recommendation 3C. And the response is that LACERA will seek professional assistance to complete an assessment of human resources staff capabilities and strengths, and that the timeline for this is June 30th, 2023. 2 comments. One is, in the past, historically, when we've been asked to evaluate human resource positions, one of the reasons for position upgrades has always been the uniqueness of LACERA positions and these special analyses that analysts and the assistant director have to complete. But yet so often we contract out those analyses. And I think we either need to pay staff to do them, or we need to not pay staff to do them and contract them out. But we can't have both, because it just increases costs unnecessarily. The other thing is I would propose that you already have a process to evaluate the staff capabilities in relation to the position description, and that's the annual performance evaluation. If staff are not doing their job very well, you should know that already. I don't know why you need until June 23, 13 months from today, to determine if staff have the capabilities that you need, or that the positions require, I should say that. Because you have the position description, you have staff current performance evaluations. So this timeline for me was really ridiculous, particularly when you acknowledge in the first sentence that this is a foundational issue that must be accomplished before other recommendations. I don't know why this can't be June 30, 2022. Maybe it's a typo, I don't know. But that's too long a period of time. I think the task is fairly simple, and it should be done by June 30th, 2022, not 23.
Mr. Kryman?
Yes. Can I just say that it's not quite as simple as it appears on paper. The execution is very, very difficult, especially when you inherit an organization that, quite frankly, in the administrative support functions as well as human resources, has not had the full attention of the past administration. The number of staff that has increased over time compared to the number of individuals that we've hired in the HR side and the admin side, we haven't hired anybody in the HR side. But we haven't added positions. I believe that this is the first year that we're actually adding positions. And so it's difficult to assess staff when they're in a crisis mode all the time. So they do really well in crisis situations and they're doing their best that they can, but they don't have time to be trained, for example, which we want to be able to relieve them to do that. They have to have the additional skills because we're putting in new systems in place. There's a whole bunch of things that need to be considered. It's not just a matter of looking at the number of individuals and saying, this is your performance evaluation and, you're doing this, that, and the other thing's good. But the organization, quite frankly, in my opinion, has not done a good job of training our staff and getting them to the level that we really need them to get to. They do a great job, don't get me wrong, but they can do better. And it's just a matter of relieving them from some of the pressure on them and allowing them to take a week or two to get trained on something that is different. And we have new systems that are coming on board as well. And so there's going to be quite a learning curve. So I don't want anyone to think that that my staff isn't doing a good job. They are doing a great job. We just need to be a little bit more mindful about, how we train them and what our responsibilities as an organization is to them in terms of their professional development, their personal growth, and so on and so forth. And so that's what that timeline reflects. We have to bring the people on board. We have to get them acclimated. We have to train them so that we can go ahead and train our existing staff to do bigger and better things. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kryman. Okay, Mr. Knox?
Thank you. Yeah, I thought it was very informative. I think my concern is that we tend to look at these like, oh, we need to be more efficient, and these are operational issues, and we're going to train staff. To me, there's still a lot of risk at play here. Especially on the investment side where we have vacancies. We have morale that is, clearly expressed in our public meetings. The impact of having these vacancies. I have real concerns about the IT side and the positions that we're using on the IT side that are contracted and not homegrown people. So, I want to see more focus and more discussion on risk. I think some of these things could be folded into the strategic plan as it's developed. And then something that I'm going to continue to bring up and harp on is just partnership with the county. And I think we can find that balance between independence and assistance from the county. But the county has resources to do recruitment, to train. And I think LACERA gets so stuck on, no, we have to train our own way. We have to do our own thing. I know we have our own certifications. I really don't know why we're not, partnering with the county more to get their assistance in catching up to recruiting, to getting ideas, to doing your reclasses. et cetera. So thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Knox. Those are good comments. Mr. Jones? Oh, Mr. Jones? Mr. Jones, I think you are on mute.
Yeah, I was trying to. I was writing notes down because Keith had mentioned some things that I wanted to say here. Excuse me. And Santos had responded some in his comments. So, just in general, the question. I've been here for a year and a half. I've noticed, every time I go through the CEO's report, you look at the number of vacancies, tagging off of what Keith just said. To some concerned about it, is it? Are we looking at it as a risk management issue now? There's a stressor operational issue clearly, and I know John Grable has talked a little bit about, the downside of having such a talented staff is, and particularly in today's talent environment, is there's any number of ways that talented staff. I think we had a gentleman leave just last month who was a critical leader in our private equity group that's out there. So a couple of questions in general, and Santos, you may have kind of highlighted it a little bit, and likewise with Keith, I agree that maybe this is part of the strategic planning process, but just need to kind of get a little better understanding now, what is our kind of talent strategy as we look at it, right? We know, in a sports metaphor, are we really trying to fill the team up with a lot of highly talented, experienced free agents? Or are we more running a program where we're trying to recruit more young, high potential candidates, knowing that we have a training capacity to kind of get them up to speed and up to performance quickly, right? And there's not a right or wrong. There's just a function of, well, what is our approach? And then how do we make sure as a board we're sustaining, we're allowing management to kind of have the sustained support and resources to execute against that particular strategy. That's out there. So that's kind of what I was picking up from here a little bit. Is yes, there's a number of vacancies that are creating operational stresses, but I'm not sure if it's still clear to me, even if I go back to Santos, your 100-day CEO report, which is when I first came on, it kind of became my anchoring thing here. Where are we now that we're kind of almost 2 years beyond that? Where do you feel like we are related to the talent strategy piece on that end? Because all I'm perceiving really now is, at this point, is kind of risk.
Yeah. So we do look at and we try to prioritize based on our risks. So, for example, Mr. Grable lost some pretty considerable talent over the last six to 9 months, and so we changed our focus and tried to address his particular issues because, keeping with the sports metaphor, what we need from John, quite frankly, are the power hitters, 3-4 batters, right? We do need some good positional players, which is where we have struggled in the past, quite frankly, and we have partnered in the past with the county to assist us with doing exams, for example, for a retired benefit specialist. Because of COVID, they were unable to assist us with that. And I can tell you that we did reach out to them, and they have agreed to assist us with running some of those exams at the lower levels. And we are trying to leverage that relationship, Trustee Knox, to make sure that we get the talent that we need and the candidate pool that we need in order to fill some of those positions. We do definitely need some utility players that can, and I call them, usually our supervisors need to have multiple general knowledge about the organization, and so we're doing our best to try to hire from within in order to do that. So we are at this particular point in time playing catch up still, and that's as a result of COVID. It's a result of some of the decisions that were made prior to COVID in terms of not hiring some of the IT staff because we were satisfied with the salary levels and so on and so forth. So I do feel that our IT section is our greatest risk. I would love to do away with all of our consultants, although they're doing a phenomenal job, and bring them with permanent employees, which I think is really what this organization needs in the long run. I don't want the trustees to go away thinking that we're not trying to develop our own talent, our own staff internally, that we are trying to do that to the greatest extent possible, but there's going to be a need to go outside as well to hire those particular positions. And I think we owe the organization for us to go out and try to find the best and the brightest, especially at the executive ranks and senior management ranks. So we will be doing some broader searches in those areas. So we do look at things from a risk perspective. That was a decision that we made in terms of a retirement benefit specialist. And then we pivoted to the investment side. We pivoted again to the needs of our legal team. And now, quite frankly, the budget reflects the need for us to start bolstering up the administrative side of the shop, because we're on the move in terms of a lot of different systems that we're going to put in place. And we are underwater, so to speak, in this particular point in time, but we're definitely going to surface better and stronger for it.
Real quick question, follow-up, if I may, Chair. Santos, in terms of the delta between the county, I know we try and maintain some fidelity to the overall county structure versus also having some independence, knowing that we have the unique fiduciary responsibility to our members. Do we feel, is there a drag still on the optimum plan you'd like to see from a talent perspective and the relationship that we try and manage with the county? I know we had the incidents around, one of the senior administrators, I think it might have been around IT and some other things of that nature. Do we still have that drag, or do you feel like we've got some clarity now between what the organization needs and the support that you have to do that versus feeling like you're still dragged down a little bit by the county?
I think that when it comes to managing the operations and hiring individuals within our ordinance positions and our budgeted positions, the county does a pretty good job of staying away and allowing us to manage the organization. Where we still have difficulty is on the ordinance side. We ask for additional positions. We have to at times justify it to the county a little bit more often than I would have liked. The salary structures are still a question at times for the higher level positions, but by and large, I think the county does a good job of allowing us to manage the organization within our ordinance and within our own budget constraints. So I don't think that that's a drag. I think it becomes a drag when we have to go through your ordinance positions and trying to get on the Board of Supervisors agenda and so on and so forth, which takes a little bit longer because we do our due diligence, they do their due diligence, our lawyers talk to their lawyers, and then we finally get it done, get a board letter, and then it goes forward, and it takes some time to do that. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you very much, Santos. Appreciate it. Thanks, Chairman.
Okay, Mr. Santos, you have a question?
Actually, I have a couple comments, if I may, Madam Chair. I'm going to start with HR. I agree with Mr. Kryman. HR have been neglected by previous administrations. Previous administrators were more concerned with providing the HR director a pension spiking by trying to increase that particular individual's salary by 30%, rather than taking a look at the entire operation and the staffing requirements so that particular division will operate with the fullest capacity. So I hear that very loud and clear, and I'm aware of that. We have a new HR director that came into, in my personal view, a total mess that she's trying to take herself out of that. So I just wanted to say that to make sure, since I've been here probably the longest of anyone. With regards to the time constraint, Mr. Moore, that we've been operating, we continue to operate like 25 years ago. Well, it's probably more like 40 or 50 years when the civil service rules were established. You know, we have civil service rules that guides the hiring processes, the exams, appeals, and things of that nature. So the civil service rules also deal with diversity as well. So there's mechanisms there that are favorable. But one thing that I have raised in the past, Mr. Kryman, and perhaps Mr. Grable, is that we need to really evaluate whether or not it will be in the best interest of the organization to take some of the high-level positions, principal investment office, for example, and take them out of civil service system. But also we need to deal with the fact that compensation, we cannot compete, at least in the investment office. We cannot compete with the industry at the current salary level that we offer our employees. So, you know, we lost those critical individuals, something that I predicted a year ago, if you guys remember, those of you who had a lot of investment meetings. I have been very concerned, and I've been raising this issue about, you know, we need to really truly evaluate the compensation structure that we offer some of those employees. Or we have to look at other pension funds and how they are managed to retain the employees, and I believe that's through compensation, incentive, things like that. So it's something that management should think about it. You know, whether or not we want to exclude people, high-level people from civil service to expedite the process, and also the other issue with regards to IT. You know, I mean, I hear my colleagues saying, you know, yes, we need to work closely with the county. All that is well and good, but remember, the county try to control us. I mean, it's in particular with the IT, they want to limit the level of compensation that we pay our employees, even though we have done studies and we have tried to retain people, hire people, but we cannot compete at the salaries that we offer right now. And so I will caution my colleagues here, let's not get too close to the county, because we are in litigation, if you remember that. So I'm not quite sure how helpful the county is going to be, because at every chance they have, they will try to control. So be aware of that. And the other issue that I had, actually, that's my only comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Santos. All very good comments and valid points to be considered. I don't see any more hands raised. I think at this point, we need to take a motion either to accept and file or do something else. But we've been going for 83 minutes, and I think we probably all need a break before we continue on with the agenda. So if we could get a motion on this particular item, take a vote, and then we'll take a break.
No motion has been made.
I will make them. Yep, go ahead.
Sorry, what did we do with the previous item? Was it just accept and file? Other than
we did an accept and file and a request to report back when the final policy was done.
Okay, so then I would move to accept and file this report.
I second that.
Great. Perla, take a vote.
Okay, Mr. Bernstein,
Aye.
Mr. Jones,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Knox,
Aye.
Mr. Moore,
Aye.
Mr. Santos,
Aye.
Chair Sanchez.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, great. It is 9:24. Can we meet back at 9:35? That's 11 minutes to run to the bathroom. And we will continue with our agenda.
Thank you.
Keith, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Normally, I get a little voice in my ear that says connected to, but it just didn't want to tell me anything.
Get any other voices in your ear?
Yeah, well, you got to worry about those, you know? Okay, it's 9:35. Let's soldier back on. Okay. All right. Moving on. We are now at item D. The recommendation is submitted by Catherine Tunn, Senior Internal Auditor, that the Audit Committee review and discuss the accounts payable audit report. Ms. Tunn, go for it.
Good morning, Chair Sanchez and trustees. We performed an audit of LACERA's accounts payable function as part of the fiscal year audit plan. The purpose of the audit was to assess the effectiveness and adequacy of key controls over the accounts payable process, the timeliness of payments, and segregation of duties. Overall controls over the accounts payable process are satisfactory based on our review of the procedures, controls, and results of our testing. We did note one low-risk opportunity for further strengthening controls, and that was to develop a policy that covers all areas of the accounts payable process. This is a best practice and helps LACERA divisions obtain a mutual understanding of responsibilities for compliance. Are there any questions?
It's pretty straightforward. Do we have any questions?
Yes, I have some questions.
Yes.
Thank you. So I have questions on the report.
Okay.
Catherine, not sure, on the written report, not your verbal report. The written report says on page 80, on page 3 of 8, the first sentence there in that, the last sentence in that first paragraph says, Our scope in this audit was limited to understanding the timeline for implementing the automated solution, referring to the ACH process. And then below that, you list audit objective and scope, none of which aligns with that statement. And further, I was confused about what the scope actually was, because you say in that sentence, it's limited to the timeline for implementing this solution. And then down below, you go into all the standard things, areas that one would look at as part of an accounts payable audit, none of which are related to the timeline of implementing the solution.
So like
So this
under
is very
audit,
confusing the way that it's laid out in this on this page 3.
so like under audit objectives and scope for number 3, it was to gain an understanding of the timeline for implementing the accounts payable solution. And that's because given the travel and expense audit report from a few years ago, one of the recommendations was to have a travel and expense module, which they are using Certify for. And as part of using Certify, they're also going to implement an accounts payable system. And that's why we wanted to look at the timeline for that as well, so they can streamline some of the accounts payable processes.
Okay, so
Mr. Kelly, I think that's the clarification is that where we say the scope in this audit was limited to understanding the timeline for implementing the automated solution, we mean the scope in the audit related to the automated system and the ACH system. That scope is limited as documented under number 3 below under audits and objectives. So it's just to gain an understanding of the timeline, and not that the entire audit is limited to that scope.
Okay, that wasn't clear at all to me. And then my other question was, I just found it very interesting that in terms of the volumes of the transactions and the volumes of the dollars that you noted on page 2, that there were absolutely no findings whatsoever. That every single discount was taken, that there were no issues related to negative balances, that there were no issues related to major vendors that you identified. Everything was perfect in an operation that paid 2,750 invoices, that dispersed $35 million to 570 distinct vendors. Everything was perfect. I just found that really interesting, that there were no findings whatsoever.
So like how we did the audit was we only did a sample testing of 11% of the dollar population. So after we got a spreadsheet of all the transactions from calendar year 2021, I did a sample of like all, at least 2 transactions from each month, usually the high dollar amounts, given that there's a variety of different vendors as well, and also looked at voided checks and also amounts that had like same dollar amounts. And of the ones that I looked at, there weren't any issues in terms of like the contracts existed. It was signed off by the budget unit and also the contract management unit, and FASD did a very good thorough job of processing the payments timely as well. So a lot of their payments were paid within 1 to 2 days, nothing more than like 6 days. So of the sample that I looked at, I didn't find any issues.
Okay,
but that doesn't mean that there might be issues that we didn't catch because it wasn't part of the sample.
Yeah, it's also, the way you reported it was odd, because although you list the 11% in the audit scope and objective, typically the findings are reported out not under the audit objective section. I think that was a little bit confusing to me as well.
On the way that it was,
and the areas you tested for as well. You didn't delineate those in the audit scope. I just think there needs to be a separate section about the actual audit test work and what the findings were related to that, just for the future, and that would be clear. Thank you.
Okay.
Keep that in mind for further reports. Thank you.
All right. Do we have any other questions? Okay, I'll entertain a motion to accept and file.
I'll move it. Accept and
Thank
file.
you. Do I have a second?
A second.
Thank you, Mr. Knox. Perla?
Mr. Bernstein,
Aye.
Mr. Jones,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Knox,
Aye.
Mr. Moore,
Aye.
Mr. Santos, Mr. Santos, Chair Sanchez.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Okay, we are now on to the report section. We have 4 items A, B, C, and D in the report section that have presentations. The remainder, Mr. Bendel, E through J, do any of those have any presentations, or can we take questions on those just for the sake of time this morning, unless you feel that we need to go through them individually?
I believe that would be fine at your discretion.
Okay, great. So we'll listen to the first presentation, which is the LA County Retirement Association Audit Committee pre-audit communication. I will hand it over to Jean Young at Plant Moran and Amanda Kronk, also at Plant Moran.
Great. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Sanchez and trustees. This morning we have with us our financial auditors, Plant Moran. It's my pleasure to introduce partner Jean Young and senior manager Amanda Kronk, who will take you through their pre-audit communication.
All right.
Ladies,
Well, good.
the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good morning. And again, my name is Jean Young, and with me is Amanda. So again, we just intend to cover the pre-required communication, talk about a couple of audit standards that are changing, and then have it open at the end for any questions. And again, really just going to provide an overview of the upcoming audit for the fiscal year June 30th, 2022. So with that, I think Amanda's going to jump into more details on the next slide.
Great, thanks, Jean. Hello, everyone. So as Jean mentioned, we're going to roll through a lot of different items today, and then talk about our audit and what our audit encompasses. So Nate, go ahead and go forward a couple slides for us. This slide's perfect. So just to make sure that we're all on the same page regarding the scope of this audit. So again, we will be auditing LACERA's annual audited financial statements along with the annual comprehensive financial report as of June 30th, 2022. And again, just for everyone's reference, the targeted issuance date of that will be October 13th this year. Along with that come two additional reports that your employers need. And that really is related to the schedule of pension amounts for LACERA, since you're a cost sharing plan on the pension side. Now that report is usually issued in March or April every year. And then we will also be auditing the schedule of changes in fiduciary net position by employer for your agent OPEB plan. And that is usually audited and issued in the spring every year. So we're just starting that right now for 6/30/2021, and a similar timing will happen next year for 2022. So let's talk a little bit about auditor responsibilities, or what our responsibilities are related to your financial statements. So our responsibilities as your independent auditor are to express an opinion on your financial statements and whether they are materially correct in accordance with GAAP. So what that means, and we'll get to that in a little bit, is we do set materiality thresholds to ensure that your statements are presented in a materially correct manner. Along with that, we are responsible to communicate any non-compliance with laws and regulations, and certainly any deficiency in internal controls that we would also identify through the audit process. So if any of these items were to arise, we would certainly report them back to this group. Part of our responsibility, again, as your independent auditor, is to identify areas that we think could lead to material misstatement, and certainly focus and design audit procedures around those areas. Now, this is not an all-inclusive list, but certainly a listing of the areas that we think bear a little bit more risk. So we just wanted to make sure that the group was aware of them. Certainly, the valuation of investments is a sensitive area, just because there are not readily available market values for all the investments that LACERA holds. So many of your, I'll call them alternative investments or harder to value investments, are valued by your investment and finance teams using audited financial statements. So we do perform extensive valuation testing on these investments, again, to ensure that they are materially materially accurate in your financial statements. As you can imagine, your census data is also a significant risk area because it does drive and is a large driver of your total pension liability under GASB 67. So we perform extensive testing on that, both from an accuracy perspective and in comparison to prior year data. We also do review the assumptions that your actuary is using, just to ensure that they're reasonable given your plan and certainly reasonable given current market conditions.
Amanda, could we take a moment here and address Mr. Kelly's question?
Sure.
Thank you, Christina. So I had a question here. When you say identification of significant risks, are the dollar thresholds associated with these risks greater than your materiality dollar threshold?
No, so we do consider materiality when we're identifying risks. That's a great question. So we perform a very risk-based audit approach that is driven from or is approached in tandem with our materiality thresholds. So we certainly, and again, I mentioned that this is not an all-inclusive list because we certainly audit LACERA as a whole, not just these 4 bullets that we've listed, but we always look at things through a materiality lens. You know, certainly we consider LACERA's internal materiality along with our thresholds that we audit to.
Okay, but risk can trump that materiality threshold.
Absolutely. So if your group, you know, if some areas arise that, and we'll get to this a little bit later in the presentation, but that again, if there are concerns around particular areas that are outside of this list, we'd be happy to chat on those, just to work through if we can design audit procedures to help address that risk for this group. We certainly would like to talk about that.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. So this 3rd bullet dovetails a little bit with the 2nd bullet. So we do also focus on the demographic data of the active participants in the plan, along with their payroll information. We do indicate that we focus primarily on the county, and that's just driven by the county making up such a large portion of the plan. Lastly, benefit payment calculations are certainly, again, a significant risk. We do focus on individuals that have commenced their benefit during the current year and provide detailed recalculations of their benefit distributions. We also will look at the distributions as compared to prior year, again, searching for anomalies that, you know, we can investigate through our audit testing. We do all of that testing in conjunction with reviewing LACERA's internal control processes and procedures. So we are not naive to the fact that LACERA does have internal controls in place, and we test those controls in conjunction with our substantive audit testing to ensure that those controls are operating as designed and that they're effective in arriving at materially correct financial statements. So we look at your internal controls through narratives that management updates annually for us. We walk through all of the processes, and what that means is we select a transaction and walk it through the process. Who initiated it, who approved it, et cetera, et cetera. I do want to mention that while we don't opine on your internal controls, again, if we find any room for improvement or have recommendations or best practices or things that we can share, we certainly do that. We don't hide any recommendations. We just don't issue an opinion on the effectiveness of your internal controls. Lastly, on this slide, again, we've talked a little bit about materiality. And again, your financial statement audit, the best way I can describe it is your financial statement audit is not a forensic audit. So we do perform analytic tests to identify the significant or unusual transactions. and focus our testing on those areas. So it's not, it doesn't, you don't want us to sit there and audit every single transaction, and we certainly, you know, that's not an effective use of your audit process. But again, we are always looking through a lens of materiality. A couple of things that have changed, and things are going to look a little bit different this year's audit in our deliverables. So I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about some standard changes that you will see the product of. So without getting into the gory details, there are some new reporting standards. You may have heard them referenced as SAS 134 to 140. Now, what that means for you is you will see some changes in our audit opinion that we issue on your June 30th, 2022 financial statements. And there will be just some additional focus on other reports that LACERA does issue. So our opinion letter, like I mentioned, will look a little bit different. Some paragraphs are going to be rearranged. Enhanced communication. So there will be a little bit more detail provided to you formally regarding the audit process, both our responsibilities and management's responsibilities. Additional focus on related party transactions. So again, the audit committee may not see this, but management will. So just a little bit more testing around related parties. And then our responsibility for other information. And that other information really is going to be focused on LACERA's popular annual financial report, which we'll get to on the next slide. So you might be saying, why do we need to change this now? Why is the timing important now? And really, the AICPA was taking a look at, okay, what are the needs of the users of the financial statements? And that really is what was driving these changes. So they've been a few years coming now, and the time is here that these changes will be made. So again, you're going to see this through this audit that we're starting currently. A few additional impacts on the next slide. Again, I mentioned the related party transactions. We always did focus on significant unusual transactions. So really, I don't see, I wouldn't expect you to see any changes in our audit approach from that standpoint. A few more letters that you'll see, a few tweaks here and there really are going to surround the engagement letter, the management representation letter, which comes at the end of the audit, and then certainly our end of audit communications. One other thing that will be a change for your team is we have looked at your popular annual financial report that gets issued, and we do think that it qualifies for review under SAS 137. Again, we will be taking a look at your popular annual financial report just to make sure that there are no inconsistencies with either your audited financial statements or your annual comprehensive financial report. Again, this is just strictly looking for, just to make sure that there are no information differences or changes between those reports.
A question on that, Madam Chair?
Yep. Go ahead.
I'm surprised to learn that you've not looked at the popular annual financial report. What is SAS 137, and why have you made the determination it applies now?
So good question. Auditing standards, and under the AICPA previous auditing standards, did not require us to review that popular annual financial report because our opinion wasn't directly on that report. What SAS 137 does is says, okay, well, if financial information is being included or linked to other reports that your independent auditor is not auditing, there's now a responsibility there to make sure that the information issued among these financial reports is all the same, and that information is not being changed from the audited financial statement issuance to this popular annual financial report. So what we did is we did take a look at that report. Just some systems will issue reports that don't have financial data in it. So those would not fall under the SAS 137. However, when we took a look at your popular annual financial report, we came to the determination that we do think it meets the spirit and the definition of SAS 137. So what we'll do on our side is, again, just take a look through that report, make sure that we don't see any inconsistencies that need to be updated.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Yeah, really, it's just adding one more layer before the report gets processed. So again, just kind of including that, so.
And it's a layer that gives us a certain level of comfort that the data is consistent too. So thank you.
Absolutely. The next slide, I know when we met with you in the late fall, early winter, we talked about some changes, potential changes to independence. And you may recall that this is really focused on determining if LACERA has any affiliates. I don't know if that word rings any bells with any of you, but the time has come. So I know management has been working very hard and very diligently to accumulate and work through the analysis of whether there is control and/or significant influence, primarily as it relates to LACERA's investments that are held. So we will be working with management to perform our review of their analysis and certainly ensure that we are independent related to any affiliates that are identified. So like I said, I know we briefly brought this up at our last presentation, and the time has come that we will need to be independent of any affiliates. And that, just as a refresher, relates to any non-attest services. So again, we don't anticipate that this is going to raise any issues. It's more of just a double check to make sure that we are in fact independent.
I have a question. I have a question on that actually. So this is with regard to your independence relative to those affiliates, but kind of getting back to the previous SAS 137, would it also mean that the audits that are performed on the valuations of the any related or sort of affiliate entities that LACERA holds, will you ensure that there is the same consistency from them to the audit to our financials, et cetera?
So, go ahead, Jean.
I was gonna say, I just want to make sure I'm understanding the question. So as far as looking at the audits that they provide on the valuation of the investments, we're not going to look at that they're consistent among. Obviously, we're going to want to understand the methodology, understand the firm, understand the timing of when the valuation work was done. This just, again, is kind of an additional layer because independence always really used to be kind of the CPA firm's responsibility. And this one is more shared because management has to assist with determining what is defined as an affiliate. And then as Amanda said, just making sure that we would be independent and we're not providing non-attest services to a potentially significant affiliate of LACERA that may not have existed under the old rules.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. So as I did mention, management's been working through their analysis and compiling all the information that we'll need to review. So I don't anticipate there being any issues here, but did just want to make everyone aware that you will, and LACERA is required to now follow this guidance. The next slide does give you a little bit more information. Again, I did mention that this is really focused primarily on the investments that LACERA does hold. There are two different pathways that you could end up with an affiliate. And again, I know management has really taken the lead on this, so I'm happy to go into more detail, but I also know that your time is precious and didn't want to bore you either. So certainly happy to walk you through this if you'd like, but there is just a little bit of information on this slide should you want a little flavor for what your team's doing.
Great, thank you. Are there any other follow-up questions besides the ones we've had so far? All right, well, thank you so much. We appreciate the pre-audit preparation and look forward to seeing the work.
Thank you all so much.
All right, thank you. So moving on to item B, which is the audit plan status report.
Hey, good morning, Chair Sanchez and trustees of the committee. At each meeting, we provide an update on our audit plan. Now, the most current reporting is as of April 15th. You'll find that on page 2 of the memo for this agenda item. I also have a presentation to provide some additional insight and details relating to our work plan. I'll make it very brief because I know our meeting is running a bit long. Unless there are any questions at this point, we'll proceed with the slide deck.
Great, thank you.
Great. First, we'll start with the audit plan dashboard. First slide. Okay. If I could direct your attention first to the chart top left corner. Here is a breakdown of those 46 items on our current audit plan. As of April 15th, we have 15 completed. We also completed the current work on 10 ongoing projects. There were 18 in progress and then 3 that had not started. I emphasize that this is as of April 15th. For those 3 items indicated here is not started, they are currently underway. That tallest pillar in progress, the 18 items, that's further broken down into the pie chart below. As you can see here, the majority are on track for completion by the end of this fiscal year. Moving to the top right corner, this is just a comparison of the progress that we made on our audit plan, April of this year versus last year. I would say the biggest difference here are the number of completed items. This year, April 15, items have been completed. Last year was about 8, as well as the number of progress that are, audits and projects that had not started at this time period, 3 as compared to 9 last year. Lower right corner is just an illustration of how we allocate internal audit resources throughout the organization. You can see here, like we're always striving to have good coverage throughout LACERA. It's about 20-25% within each of the core divisional groups within LACERA. So there's pretty good coverage there. Moving to the next slide. Here's just a listing of those completed audit engagements and projects. I won't spend much time here. There's already been a lot of discussion earlier on some of the completed audit engagements. The other items have all been discussed at previous audit committee meetings. Next slide. Those 18 in progress audit engagements and projects are listed here. I just wanted to show the committee the progress that's been made and sort of what phase we are in within each of these items. So that blue bar next to each project indicates the phase of completion within all of these in progress items. And as I said earlier, the majority are on track to be completed by the end of this fiscal year. There are 6 that are nearing completion in May, another 6 in June. The other ones, the work will probably continue into the next fiscal year. However, we will continue to update the committee on the progress in closing those audits out. Next slide. Here, I just wanted to also provide some insight to those recommendations that are specific to internal audit. We have had 2 audit engagements that related to internal audit operations. The first was a KMPG audit that was conducted last year. It resulted in 14 recommendations relating to our recommendation follow-up process. As of this reporting, we had only 1 outstanding audit recommendation. However, I'm really happy to report that 1 last recommendation was completed, closed out last Friday. So we are completely done with all of the KPMG recommendations. The other audit report is our external quality assessment, our EQA. You might recall that at the March meeting, Quality Services presented that report. Now, we did receive the highest rating, meaning that we were in conformance with IIA standards. However, another subpart to this type of peer review is to identify any opportunities for improvements. That resulted in 23 recommendations to internal audit. As of this reporting, we have completed or implemented 6 of those recommendations. There are 12 that are currently in progress in various stages of completion. 5 that we haven't started, those are more the complex sort of recommendations that require a little bit more time and planning. We have another agenda item later on in this meeting, so I won't spend any more time on this slide. And this last slide is just a summary of some of the other work that we've done relating to our other projects. This includes how we continue to follow up on recommendations, our quality insurance improvement program, where we meet monthly, we discuss internal IIA standards, and it's how we are always looking and enhancing our own internal operations with the development of new procedures. And this concludes my overview of our audit plan at this time. If there are any questions, we can address those.
Thank you. First, let me just say I love the dashboard. I think it makes a lot of information a lot easier to digest. So thank you for that work. Do we have any other questions? Okay, thank you, Ms. Collins. That was excellent. Item C, annual audit planning for fiscal year 2022-23. Mr. Bendel.
I appreciate Leisha expediting her presentation because for the next hour, we're going to be discussing risk assessment. Just kidding. I'm going to walk through, I'll expedite this as well. If I could, you move to actually 2 slides forward. This first part of this slide, the overview of the internal audit process, is the risk planning part of it, the defining the audit universe, assessing risk, and developing the audit plan. And as you know, in the past, we've brought you the risk assessment process and brought you the audit plan. Actually, let me point out the second part of this presentation here of this slide talks about the audit execution process. That's not really part of this discussion. So if we could move to the next slide. At your February-March meeting, we brought you a framework of the audit plan of what we identified to be on the audit plan for fiscal year 22-23 for the basis of approving the internal audit budget. At this meeting, I want to talk to you a little more about the sausage making, I guess, the risk assessment process, and something that the committee has looked for from us is a little more transparency, a little more insight as to what the risk universe is. And another request was for more of a multi-year audit plan, and I'm going to talk about how we're addressing that. And there's a lot of work going into that, and I think being that we're really going through the development of this, I think it's going to become more efficient in the future. But hopefully you'll see that we're going to provide that transparency, that insight to our risk coverage. And I think a lot of the discussion today has been excellent on the risks in the organization. So at the August meeting, we'll be bringing forward a more complete audit universe for your review. And one more thing we're looking for, which we talked about at the February meeting, to talk about today, is getting the input. The first step in the audit process, in the risk assessment process every year, is to get the input of the audit committee. So as we go through this, we're always looking for input from the committee. I can't emphasize that enough. If there's areas of concern you have throughout the organization, we'd really like to have you bring that up and let us know. We need to put that on our radar screen. So if we could move to the next slide. This is just a graphical representation of the audit universe organization-wide. I won't make any other further comments on that. So this is the crux of the discussion, I guess, today is this is a draft, an example in the Financial Accounting Services Division, and I really appreciate Ted allowing us, we asked his permission to use his section as a demonstration for you. You can see on the left side, it talks about FASD overall, and then we've got the three main sections within FASD, the 3 audit universe groupings within FASD: general accounting, reporting and compliance, and investment accounting. And then you have more granularity in the column to the left. And I'm not sure in the final product that we bring forward at your August meeting if we'll go to this level of granularity. But at this level of granularity, we do talk about the different audit processes and the audit cycle for these. And then we have a last audit rating column. Inherent risk is probably, I wouldn't focus too much on the colors here because we get caught up in this. This is from an audit perspective, and not sure that we'll actually bring forward the inherent risk. I mean, essentially inherent risk is red for all processes generally, but it's a residual risk that's important. And whether something's yellow or green, low, medium, high. Depends on when we last audited it, our understanding of risk in the organization, et cetera, et cetera. There's a number of key things we look at, 5 different categories that we look at for risk. The risks addressed by column talks about who primarily does the audit work in that area, the external audit, external additional firms that we hire to do external audit work or internal audit work. And here's the multi-year plan that I talked about. We indicate here what's on the current year's, the year that we're in right now, the one that Leisha just talked about. What projects do we have on the current audit plan? What do we project to include at this point on the fiscal year 2023 audit plan? And what do we project to be on the 2024 audit plan? So being that risk is so dynamic, it's very difficult to create a multi-year audit plan at a point in time and be able to say, well, here's the actual projects that are going to be on an audit plan in 2024. I don't think you'd want to do that, but this gives you some insight here as to when we have this for the entire organization, where you can see what was done in the past, what we're doing currently, what we project to do next year, and you can see where the gaps in risk exist. So I'd like feedback on this if anybody has any, because this is really hopefully addressing some concerns we've heard from the committee.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Going forward, one of the things that we do, beyond talking to the committee, talking to the executive team, is to survey management on an annual basis. This year, we asked management to just update the surveys from the last year, and we asked them to focus on these areas that we considered we wanted really them to focus on this year was the significant changes in personnel, changes to laws, policies. You can see the different areas that we really wanted to focus on if there'd been any of these matters that had come to the attention of the division managers in their sections. And I won't spend too much time on that, but if we could move to the next slide. So last year, we actually had you participate in an exercise on the Institute of Internal Auditors on risk exercise that they perform, where they survey numerous organizations. And I think they surveyed 30 different organizations and interviewed 90 participants. And it was 30 board trustees, it was 30 executive team members, and it was 30 chief audit executives, and identified top risks among these organizations. And the documents included for your review as well. I'm not going to be, last year we made a presentation on that document. We won't be doing that this year, but we just wanted to point out here of the top risks that were identified by the Institute of Internal Auditors, how we've addressed these. And a lot of it's being discussed today at this meeting. Cybersecurity, we have a presentation. Organizational governance, we don't have a discussion at this meeting, but we have at the last meeting, we had authorization to hire Weaver, one of the audit firms in our pool, to do work on organizational governance and assessing, in accordance with your charter, our maturity level in 5 different components of organizational government. So that review is currently going on right now. In talent management, the presentation by Doug Slyke and Ide Bailey today, and I think a really healthy discussion on that audit was had by the committee. In business continuity and crisis management, we have a 2023 project, but internal audit has been involved very much on business continuity and crisis management. And we had a tremendous real life exercise, of course, it goes without saying, the pandemic, but I think there's areas of business continuity and crisis management that we need somebody independent to come in and take a look at and see how we stand on that regard. I think the pandemic proved, and as the article talks about, that we've learned that we don't know for sure that we can address every risk, but we've learned that we are resilient and we're able to adapt. And it's certainly given, I would hope, the audit committee and the boards at LACERA comfort that LACERA is able to address and pivot and in the face of crisis. So we can move to the next slide. I think I talked briefly about this, and I guess I mentioned what it is. These are the top risks that they came up with this year. There are some slight changes from last year. I know one for sure is that in the area of sustainability on the 2021 plan, they've broken that out now by organizational governance, social sustainability, and environmental sustainability. So there's a lot of these risks have continued. I think the top risks continued from last year, but there are some changes that occurred throughout. And these aren't all the risks that many of these risks, as we go to the next slide, you'll see that in the exercise done by the IAA, they on risk survey, they identified by the check marks in the left column those risks that they considered the top risks to them, the top 5. And then we conducted an exercise here between the executive team and an internal audit, and we actually were consistent in identifying what we considered top risks to LACERA. And again, I just mentioned how much focus you've seen on the audit plans in the area of cybersecurity, talent management, organizational governance, data privacy. Culture is actually being included in that review by Weaver on organizational governance as a first step. Supply and vendor management is something that we're going to have to consider as we go into the next year's audit plan, how we might address that. But we can move to the next slide. That's it. Questions?
Okay, so Mr. Bendel, if I can just take the first question, well, just comment. I see this as kind of the ongoing evolution towards the risk assessment. Is that fair? Because these are sort of drafts, and the eventual plan will have either all the elements that you've shown us here, some additional ones. Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely correct. That's a fair assessment.
Okay, so I think as a first draft, I think this was very, very interesting. I think as we go through it, maybe some definition of, for example, if you're going to use inherent risk versus residual risk, some definitional guidance at some point, maybe not in the document, but at some point would be very helpful. Mr. Kelly?
Thank you. I just want to be clear, is there anything for trustees to do at this point? I was a little bit.
This is just a report.
Okay.
No, the only thing I asked for is if you have thoughts as we're going forward and continuing to meet with management, developing our risk assessments in our audit universes, if there's anything that you're aware of as trustees on the audit committee, concerns you have, we look for your input, and that's it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Any other comments? Okay, super. All right, moving on to item D, the overview of the Survey of Retirement Systems results. Mr. Griffin.
Morning, Chair Sanchez and everyone else on this call. I'm going to focus on page 178 of the agenda package, and that's a table. There's an attachment which is sort of an overview of the methodology and the background on this. It was as a result of a informal, it was a result of a request from the committee to do an informal study. It does attempt to provide a high level view of some internal audit functions in large, I'll say informally, peer group members. And there's a lot of other things going on within each function and each pension fund. So you can't necessarily draw conclusions. So just briefly, the size of the staff does not necessarily correlate to the number of members or the total assets. Some of these departments have employer audits. Some of them have specialized staff. That's, I think, largely as in response to the priorities of the governing boards and possibly, and I'm reaching, the laws that govern the organization. And then some had varied areas of responsibility. For instance, some may have financial audit oversight and some may not. I can't comment on that. Some of them are assigned enterprise risk management, which is a fairly broad area. There are also third-party audits that some have and some don't. So, but this is just meant to give you sort of a high level. If some people like 50,000 feet, this is probably out at the space station. So, but it is, you know, it gives you a start. I'm glad to try to address any questions or comments there may be.
So thank you for this, Mr. Griffin. I think if what I took away from this was that in fact, the notion that one size fits one really does seem to be the case, in that there aren't many correlations that you can draw, and that each organization really takes it upon themselves to determine how they're going to address risks within their organization, either with internal staff, with external auditors, with specialized staff, or not having specialized staff. And so, you know, and if we are to sort of make an assessment of what is best practice, you know, I think best practice is what we determine it to be relative to the IIA standards, as opposed to determining it relative to our peers. Would that be a fair statement?
Yes, I believe so.
Great. Are there any other questions? Mr. Knox.
Just quickly, a question for Mr. Bendel, whether anything struck you in looking at this information, or whether you had any preconceived ideas before you saw this.
No, this is consistent with what I had talked about at the last at the meeting where this was discussed. That it really is difficult to, it's apples, you know, not necessarily apples to oranges, but it's one size fits one. And organizations, as Mr. Griffin pointed out, have different levels of maturity, complexity, and internal audit's role is different within those organizations. So this is absolutely on par with my thoughts about it.
Thank you.
Great. Any other comments or questions? Okay, so the remainder of the items in the reports are sort of standard reports that we normally see. Do we have any comments or questions regarding any of those items? I'd like to just comment that I am pleased that we're continuing to keep our recommendation follow-up in order. And I also noted the continued use of the ethics hotline status. Not that I want a lot of ethical hotline issues, but that I want to know that our employees feel comfortable using it. And so that makes me very happy. So with that, we'll move on to consultant comments. Do you have any more comments than the ones you've given us, Mr. Griffin?
A 1 minute comment, and not to be preaching, you know, RFP processes are really important in an organization. And I think part of the art of governance is knowing what details are important and what details may not matter. And, you know, in that earlier discussion, there was one thing that did not come up, and it comes from a consultant's view. If you're not particular about how you present the RFP to the consultants, you can end up with a bid protest and a really messy process. And, you know, and so I'm just saying you have to differentiate what are the key areas and key scopes. Does it matter if you refer to audit versus non-audit or attestation services? That's it.
Thank you for that. And that is a very astute comment. I think Mr. Bendel has some follow-on for that item. So, and I appreciate the comments. Do we have any items for staff review?
No items at this time.
We have a report back on the bonus program. Yes.
That's correct. Yeah, a report back on the bonus program when it's concluded. So that is an item for staff review. Great. Do we have any comments for good of the order? Okay. Well, I think we're all good and in order. So With that, we will head into executive session for our last two items.
One moment while we transfer to executive session.
Great, thank you.
You may be dismissed from the meeting platform now.
We barely heard that.